Every week, headlines move fast. Names appear, then quietly fade. But behind each name is a life that once mattered deeply to someone. To the public, these figures were actors, musicians, athletes, creators, leaders, faces on screens, voices in songs, stories we thought we already knew. But death has a way of stripping away the image and revealing the human truth underneath. This week, 10 lives came to an end. Some were icons, some were controversial, some were still searching for their place in the world. What connects them is not fame, but fragility. As we remember them, we are not chasing scandal. We are looking at what remains when the spotlight goes dark. And if stories about real lives behind public names matter to you, a quiet subscribe helps this journey continue. Let's begin. To most viewers, Pat Finn was not a star you chased. He was a star you recognized. The familiar face who appeared just long enough to make a scene feel real. The kind of actor who slipped seamlessly into your living room without ever demanding attention. On television, he lived many lives. A coworker, a neighbor, a man with something slightly off in his timing or tone. He showed up on shows like The Middle, Seinfeld, Friends, and That 70s Show, often for a single episode, sometimes for recurring roles. And then he moved on, quietly, to the next job. But behind that consistency was a life built on uncertainty. Guest actors rarely get guarantees. Every role is an audition for survival. Finn worked for decades in an industry that rewards fame but depends on people who never receive it. People who show up prepared, professional, and invisible. Colleagues described him as reliable and warm, the kind of actor directors trusted because he made everyone else better. In one memorable Seinfeld episode, he played Joe Mayo, the man whose fur coat famously flew out a window. The joke landed because Finn understood restraint. He never pushed. He let the moment breathe. Off-screen, his battle with bladder cancer was private. There were no dramatic announcements, no public countdown, just a man continuing to live his life until he could not anymore. When he died at 60, there was no headline storm. But the response told a quieter truth. Fans remembered exact scenes, exact lines, moments they did not realize had stayed with them for years. Pat Finn represents a side of entertainment rarely discussed. The working actor, the backbone of storytelling. Someone whose career was not about being unforgettable, but about being believable. And sometimes, that is what lasts the longest. James Ransone was never meant to be smooth. His presence on screen carried tension before he ever spoke. A nervous energy, a fragility that felt uncomfortably real. He was the kind of actor who made audiences lean in, not relax. Many first noticed him as Ziggy Sobotka on The Wire, a character desperate to be respected, forever one step behind everyone else. Ziggy was reckless, emotional, and painfully exposed. What made the performance unforgettable was how little it felt like acting. Ransone built a career on characters who lived at the edge. In Treme, Generation Kill, and later films like Tangerine and The Black Phone, he returned again and again to people who were wounded, restless, searching. In It Chapter 2, as the adult Eddie Kaspbrak, he brought humor layered with fear. Audiences laughed, then felt the ache underneath. Off-camera, Ransone was known as thoughtful and intense. Friends spoke of a man deeply committed to his craft, but also sensitive to the pressures that came with it. The industry rewards confidence, but rarely teaches survival to those who feel too much. There was no sense of arrival in his story, no final reinvention, just a continued attempt to stay present, to keep working, to keep meaning something in a profession that constantly asks you to prove your worth again. When his death was confirmed at 46, the shock came not from scandal, but from recognition. Many saw themselves in him, the insecurity, the effort, the quiet battles no performance ever reveals. James Ransone did not play heroes. He played people struggling to hold themselves together, and for many viewers, that honesty was the most powerful role of all. Brigitte Bardot did not just enter cinema. She changed how the world looked at women on screen. In the 1950s and 60s, Bardot became an image before she became a person. Her beauty was not subtle, it was overwhelming. Films like And God Created Woman turned her into an international symbol almost overnight. The camera adored her, the public followed, the industry capitalized on every glance. But fame arrived faster than identity. Behind the sensual confidence projected on screen was a woman deeply uncomfortable with the role she was asked to live off camera. Interviews from that era revealed exhaustion, isolation, and a growing resentment toward an industry that treated her more as a possession than a person. By the early 1970s, Bardot made a choice that stunned the film world. At the height of her recognition, she walked away. No farewell tour, no slow fade. She left acting entirely and never returned. What followed was not retreat, but redirection. She devoted her life to animal welfare, pouring the same intensity once demanded by cinema into activism. It was not an image makeover. It was a rejection of the life that fame had forced upon her. In later years, Bardot spoke openly about how deeply unhappy she had been during her most celebrated period. The spotlight, she admitted, never felt like freedom. It felt like confinement. When she died at 91, tributes focused on her legacy as an icon. But the quieter truth remains just as powerful. She is remembered not only for what she represented, but for what she refused to continue being. Brigitte Bardot proved that sometimes the bravest role is the one you walk away from. Melanie Watson entered television history quietly, but her presence carried weight far beyond screen time. In the 1980s, when representation was rare and often shallow, she appeared on Different Strokes as Kathy, Arnold's friend. To many viewers, it was simply another sitcom character. To others, it was the first time they saw someone like themselves reflected on television. Watson was born with osteogenesis imperfecta, a rare genetic disorder that made her bones fragile. Hollywood was not built for bodies that did not fit its expectations. Roles were limited, opportunities were cautious, but she stepped into her work with calm confidence, never asking for pity, never asking to be hidden. What made her performances memorable was not novelty, it was normalcy. Her characters were written as people first, not conditions. That quiet shift mattered more than any headline. Away from acting, Watson's sense of purpose deepened. She founded Train Right, an organization that trained shelter dogs to assist people with disabilities. While her on-screen work introduced visibility, her off-screen work created independence for others. She turned personal limitation into shared strength. Friends described her as patient and grounded, someone who understood struggle but refused to be defined by it. Her life was not loud, but it was intentional. When she died at 57, there was no surge of viral clips. Instead, messages came from people whose lives had been changed in practical ways. Those who walked more freely, those who felt seen earlier than they otherwise would have. Melanie Watson's legacy is not measured in episodes or awards. It lives in access, in dignity, in the quiet truth that representation, when done honestly, can last far longer than fame. David Adam Williams never felt like a performer chasing attention. He felt like a companion, someone who invited you along, not to impress, but to share the moment. To millions online, he was simply Adam the Woo, a familiar voice wandering through theme parks, abandoned places, filming locations, and quiet corners of American nostalgia. His videos were not loud. They were patient, curious, and unhurried, built on the idea that discovery did not need an audience to matter. For nearly 2 decades, Williams documented his life in motion, not luxury, not spectacle, just movement, memory, and the comfort of routine. His catchphrase, "Join me, shall you?" was less branding than invitation. What many did not see was how much consistency cost. Daily uploads turn curiosity into obligation, exploration becomes schedule, and solitude, once a choice, can quietly become the price of staying visible. Those close to him described a man who valued independence deeply, someone who found peace in walking alone through familiar places, camera in hand, letting the world exist without commentary. The internet saw freedom. Behind it was discipline, repetition, and the pressure to never disappear. When Williams died at 51, the reaction was unusually personal. Viewers did not just mourn a creator, they mourned a presence in their daily lives, a routine, a voice that felt constant during uncertain years. Comments filled with stories of people who watched him during lunch breaks, late nights, hospital stays, and moments when companionship was needed most. Not because he offered answers, but because he showed up. David Adam Williams leaves behind more than videos. He leaves a reminder that connection does not always come from intimacy. Sometimes it comes from quiet consistency, and sometimes being there is enough. Perry Bamonte lived in the space just behind the spotlight, not the voice at the center, not the face on the poster, but the sound that quietly shaped how a generation felt. When he joined The Cure in the early 1990s, the band was already iconic. Yet Bamonte's role was essential. Guitar textures, keyboard layers, atmosphere, the elements that filled the room after the chorus ended. Songs like Friday I'm in Love and A Letter to Elise carried his fingerprints even when most listeners did not know his name. Life inside a legendary band is rarely as romantic as it appears. Touring blurs time, creativity becomes repetition, and individuality must exist inside something much larger than yourself. Bamonte navigated that space with quiet discipline. After leaving the band in the mid-2000s, he did not chase reinvention. There were no public disputes, no dramatic exits, just distance, reflection, and eventually, a return years later when the timing felt right. Those who worked with him described a musician deeply committed to tone rather than attention. Someone more interested in how a song made people feel than how it made him look. That mindset often goes unnoticed, until it is gone. When Bamonte died at 65 after a short illness, fans responded with gratitude rather than shock. They revisited songs they had lived with for decades, realizing how much emotional memory had been carried by details they never consciously heard. His induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame alongside his bandmates confirmed what insiders already knew. He mattered. Perry Bamonte reminds us that not all legacies stand at the microphone. Some of them surround us quietly and stay with us longer than we expect. Don Bryant spent much of his life giving other people the words for their feelings. He was not the voice most listeners recognized first, but he was often the reason those songs stayed. In the early 1970s, Bryant and his wife, Ann Peebles, co-wrote I Can't Stand the Rain. The song felt simple, almost effortless. Yet its power came from restraint. Heartbreak delivered without drama. Pain expressed without explanation. That was Bryant's gift. He understood that emotion did not need volume to be real. While others chased the spotlight, he stayed in Memphis, rooted in a sound built on patience and honesty. He wrote for feeling, not fashion. Unlike many songwriters of his era, Bryant stepped away from constant production early. Not because the work disappeared, but because life demanded space. Family, faith, and a slower rhythm mattered more than staying visible. Decades later, when he returned as a vocalist with the Bow Keys, it felt less like a comeback and more like a quiet continuation. An older voice, weathered but steady. A man who had lived enough life to mean every line he sang. Those who knew him described someone grounded and unassuming. A craftsman rather than a performer. Someone who believed songs should serve people, not egos. When Don Bryant died at 83, there were no dramatic headlines. But musicians spoke with reverence. Fans returned to songs they had cried to without ever knowing his name. His legacy is woven into moments. Late-night drives, kitchen radios, memories that surface without warning. Don Bryant reminds us that the most enduring art often comes from those who never asked to be seen. They just wanted to be heard. John Robertson was never the loudest player on the field. He did not dominate headlines with spectacle or controversy. What he carried instead was trust, the kind that teammates rely on when everything is on the line. In the late 1970s, Robertson became a central figure in Nottingham Forest's improbable rise. Under Brian Clough, the club transformed from underdogs into European champions, twice, and in those defining matches, Robertson delivered when it mattered most. He played with discipline rather than flair, positioning over showmanship, precision over impulse. When others drew defenders, Robertson found space and finished calmly. Goals that did not look dramatic, but changed outcomes forever. Beyond club success, he wore the Scotland jersey with quiet pride. In 1981, at Wembley Stadium, he scored the winning goal against England. For many Scottish fans, that moment became memory etched into identity, not a celebration of ego, but of collective belief. After retirement, Robertson never chased nostalgia. There were no grand farewell tours. He stayed close to the game, but at a distance from its noise. A reminder that fulfillment does not require constant attention. When illness slowly took him at 72, tributes focused not on statistics, but reliability. The word appeared again and again. Dependable, steady, someone you wanted beside you when pressure arrived. John Robertson's story is not about individual glory. It is about contribution. about doing the work repeatedly, without complaint, until excellence becomes invisible. In a world obsessed with highlights, his legacy lives in the moments that made everything else possible. Guy Chouinard built his career on endurance, not flash, not bravado, just the quiet confidence of someone willing to stay in the game longer than most. In the 1970s and 80s, he became a reliable force for the Atlanta and Calgary Flames. Season after season, he showed up. Goals, assists, minutes played without complaint. By the time he was traded to the street, Louis Blues in 1983, Chouinard stood as the Flames' all-time leader in points and assists. A record earned through accumulation, not spectacle. Hockey is unforgiving. The travel is brutal. The injuries linger, and recognition often fades quickly unless it is constantly refreshed. Chouinard accepted that reality early. He played for the team, not the headline. When his playing days ended, he did not step away from the sport. He shifted roles. Coaching in the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League, he shaped young players not just in skill, but in discipline. Over time, his teams accumulated wins, 515 of them, more than any other coach in the league's history. Those who worked under him remembered structure and fairness. He demanded effort, but he gave stability. For many young athletes, he represented the first adult who treated the game as both serious and humane. When Chouinard died at 69, fans remembered the records, but players remembered something else: the patience, the belief that consistency mattered more than momentary brilliance. Guy Chouinard's legacy is not frozen in a single highlight. It stretches across decades of trust. As a player, as a coach, as someone who understood that success is often built quietly, shift by shift, and that kind of legacy rarely disappears. Lou Gerstner did not arrive at IBM as a visionary inventor. He arrived as a realist. In the early 1990s, IBM was collapsing under its own legacy, a giant built for a different era, slow to adapt, losing relevance, and bleeding confidence. Many believed the company was too large, too old, and too divided to survive intact. Gerstner stepped into leadership without the usual mythology. He was not a technologist by training. He did not promise reinvention through slogans. What he offered instead was discipline, listening before speaking, understanding before restructuring. One of his first decisions stunned the industry. He refused to break IBM apart. At a time when dismantling seemed inevitable, he chose cohesion over fragmentation. People inside the company later described that moment as a psychological turning point. For the first time in years, someone believed IBM was still worth saving. Gerstner focused on customers rather than products, on clarity rather than ambition. He pushed collaboration inside a culture built on silos. It was not glamorous work, but it worked. Over time, IBM stabilized, then recovered. Jobs were saved. Confidence returned, and a company many had already written off regained purpose. After leaving IBM, Gerstner rarely spoke in heroic terms about his success. He described leadership as responsibility rather than dominance, pressure rather than privilege. Those close to him said he understood the weight of decisions that affected thousands of lives. When he died at 83, tributes focused less on profit and more on impact. Not just what he fixed, but how he did it. Calmly, methodically, without ego. Lou Gerstner's story reminds us that influence does not always come from brilliance. Sometimes it comes from restraint, from knowing when not to break what can still be held together. When the cameras turn off and the headlines move on, what remains is never the image. It is the effort behind it, the pressure people carried, the choices they made when no one was watching. The lives we looked at today were different in fame, fortune, and path, but they shared something deeply human. Each of them tried to matter in their own way, some in front of millions, some quietly in the background, some while carrying struggles the world never fully saw. Their stories remind us that legacy is rarely about perfection. It is about presence, about showing up again and again, even when the spotlight feels heavy or unfair. So now, I want to ask you, which story stayed with you the most, and why? And if thoughtful, human stories behind public names matter to you, consider subscribing. It helps keep these conversations going, one life at a time.